welcome back to the Dudley Bug channel. Today I'm talking about the history of Himley Hall, both the hall itself as we know it now, but also what was there before. So Himley, long before the hall existed, the village existed, Himley. It was mentioned in the Domesday book of 1086. The Domesday book was the kind of first national census that was initiated by William the Conqueror to basically find out exactly what it was he conquered and what he actually owned. I'm not quite sure how well this is going to come out because the sun's right where I don't want it to be. Not usually a problem I have when I'm doing this. Anyway, where I am now, again I'll pop it on the map, but this is roughly the site of an archaeological dig that was done by the Wolverhampton Archaeology Group, WAG, 2012-ish. Now it wasn't a full-on excavation the way perhaps that you see in Time Team and things like that. It was a series of 42 test pits just being small holes, generally a metre square, that you'll dig down and see what you find. Almost like experimental. Now they did find the church that was demolished in 1764, and they also found below that the remains of an earlier medieval church that was probably 13th or 14th century. Amongst all the other things they found was plaster and window glass, which is quite normal when you're excavating an old building, and lots and lots of shroud pins. They would be used to keep the wrappings together on bodies that would be buried obviously around the church. That's the village as it was. I mean, I think it's fairly safe to assume that the original village, about where we are now, was clustered around that medieval church. And as I said, the last medieval church was demolished in 1764. And there was, I'm not sure if there still is, I'll find out, a display within Himley Hall itself showing some of the finds and some information. There is also a good video on YouTube regarding Wolverhampton Archaeology Group and their efforts here at Himley Hall. Now, if you've ever been to Himley Hall, you might have spotted this ditch here. It's not unique to Himley Hall, and these things were referred to as ha-has, or sometimes haw-haws, and the reason they're there is basically to stop any livestock they used to have, especially sheep, that they used as kind of lawnmowers before lawnmowers existed. Stop them from getting too close to the hall itself. They were better than a fence because a fence could be thought of as unsightly, whereas you did these sunken ditches. When you were looking from the house, these ditches are basically invisible. So it is literally like an invisible barrier to stop any unwanted livestock from getting too close to the house and spoiling the view, and of course leaving their deposits all over the lawns. Ha-ha. No idea why it's called that. I've looked at various explanations as to why they're called ha-has or haw-haws. I'm not convinced by any of them though. There you are. I did want to do a bit of filming out on the grounds over there. We probably managed to get to the lake later on, but there's some kind of music festival going on tomorrow, and with a lot of it being fenced off and the generator making a lot of row, it's not happening for me. Actually at the moment we're on the western side of well, you can't call it the modern hall, can you? Himley Hall as most of us know it. Having said that, again, we're not into the building of this place yet. We do know originally there was what's called a moated manor house. I've only been able to find one image of it, and that was probably slightly southwest of the hall as it is now, because when they started building the hall initially, they still needed somewhere to live, so they didn't immediately knock down the moated manor house once the building of Himley Hall proper started. There was one fella called Dudley who lived here. I don't want to go into too much detail about Dudley, but he was a pioneer of the Industrial Revolution before the Industrial Revolution even started, very much into smelting iron. As I said, I don't want to go too much into him, but he was an illegitimate son of the Baron, and he was quite well known at the time, Dudley. Now, by the time of the moated manor house, or late on in its life, the lords of the manor were the Suttons, but in the 1600s the Sutton line passed over, or the ownership of Himley Hall passed over to the Wards, and has basically more or less been with them ever since. Now, when I start talking about the Barons of Dudley and the Earls of Dudley and all of that, a lot of them have very similar names, so you're going to have to bear with me. Certainly while it was still a moated manor house, in 1645, King Charles spent the night here, keeping his army in the grounds before the Battle of Naseby, which he promptly lost, of course. The battle was actually on the 15th of the 5th, 1645, and just as a nice little add-on to that, the next morning when they set off to do battle, one soldier was hanged for mutiny. I got rid of that by the time I was in the army, obviously. At least I think they had. This little bit we're looking at here is the original part of the stone hall. I'll go into more detail about that in a minute, because I can't get a particularly good view from here. Again, I would get a better view from the croquet lawns, but we're not allowed on them. It doesn't say, but I suspect they'll probably open fire on me, what it being a special place and all that, if I try to go onto the croquet lawns. Now, ever since 1646, Himley was the main home of the Lords of Dudley, because, as some of you might know, at the end of the Civil War, Dudley Castle was slighted, in other words, demolished. And then big change came in 1740. A fella called the 6th Lord Ward, John Ward, and he was made the first Viscount of Himley. So he inherited it, the estate. Now, he was an MP. Now, back in those days, being an MP was a very, very important job, and only open to the rich. And what he did, he had a look round and decided he wanted to build Himley Hall as we know it now, or at least the start of it. So he began a new, what's called Palladian style hall. There were no wings on the hall to begin with. I'll pop that picture up and show you, as I said before, where the original stone hall ended. And then, once that was underway, he had the old moated manor house demolished and then very quickly after that he added north and south wings to the hall as well. The one we're looking at behind me now is the south wing, and in 1764 he had the village and church relocated, in other words knocked down and moved somewhere else. So that was the first major mover regarding Himley Hall. 6th Lord Ward, 1st Viscount Ward. So he's the fella that started off Himley Hall as we know and see it now. In 1774, 7th Lord Ward, also called John, hired a fella called Lancelot Brown, known as Capability Brown, who was well known for designing parks and landscape. Think of him as a very large scale landscape gardener. He designed over 170 parks. Wasn't an architect, mind, more of a landscape gardener. And he came up with plans to completely redo the surrounding area. Obviously the village and church being got rid of. And by 1779 a lake had been added and a new carriageway opened, and he also planted loads of oak copses or clusters around the estate. And in 1788 the estate passed to Lord's brother William Ward, and he became 3rd Viscount Ward. Now he was quite well known for being nice to people. He was actually called the poor man's friend because he was a philanthropist. A lot of people back there who got money and land weren't, of course. And he actually, believe it or not, installed an organ here at Himley Hall. After that, not much of a change really until 1823, and the 4th Viscount and 1st Earl of Dudley, called, yes you've guessed it, John William Ward. He was actually Foreign Secretary for a time, so he was a very powerful man. And what he did, he kind of fiddled with the buildings. He had rendering put on them all, because originally, even when all the wings were up, you would have seen the stonework in front of you. But he had them all rendered, and he had the north and south wings completely fully connected to the original western wing. And he also added stables, which are just over to my left, a brew house and a wash house. The south wing, I'll put a picture of that up, which you would be forgiven for thinking was the main kind of almost like the entrance to Himley Hall, because it's, to my eyes, the most ornate one. He did some things to that. He added parapets, a pediment, put sash windows in, and added what are called large Doric pillars. What I intend to do is put a still picture up and point out what I actually mean by all these highfalutin words to you. And then in 1833, the 1st Earl of Dudley, John William Ward, died without issue. In other words, no children. So in 1833, the hall passed to another branch of the family, because said there'd been no children to inherit. But by 1845, another Ward came along, William Ward. He was the 11th Baron, and he inherited, as I said, in 1845, and he was actually recreated as an Earl in 1860 as well. Now, the thing is, he was far too young at the time to manage his own affairs, so it was looked after by trustees. And in 1837, the trustees bought Whitley Court down in Worcestershire, It cost, at the time, it cost £680,000. Now that was a lot of money back in the 1830s, but they bought Whitley Court, and in essence the Ward family more or less then moved to Whitley Court as their main place of residence. However, in 1919 Him became the family home again, and Whitley Court was sold in 1920. Okay, so Whitley Court sold in 1920, and the family had moved back into Himley Hall by then, so they decided to do some improvements. They added plumbing and central heating, a cinema, an indoor swimming pool and an ice house. In fact, in 1934 it was in such a good state, for want of a better way of putting it. In 1934 the Duke of Kent and his new bride honeymooned here. Well, they spent the first 2 weeks of their honeymoon here at Himley Hall. Just walking south now with the hall to my back. So then came World War II, and the hall was used in part as a Red Cross hospital, though the family, most of them, were still in residence. Then in 1947 the place was put up for auction. There was the hall itself, but there were also lots of other smaller properties and lots that were up for sale at the same time. Regarding the hall though, the National Coal Board bought it for £45,000 to be used as their regional offices, so for admin purposes. Unfortunately, during their refurbishments there was a big fire, and most of the south wing and the library were destroyed. Then we get to 1966, and the National Coal Board sold Himley Hall to both Dudley and Wolverhampton councils for £135,000, and as a result of that 247 window frames were removed and restored to the original sash window versions. See what I mean about that ha-ha being barely visible from the house itself. Now, 1970, the hall became used as accommodation and admin for Wolverhampton Polytechnic, which meant that they had to add partitions and accommodation and all that kind of stuff. It would have been quite nice if you got Himley Hall as your digs, or whatever students call them, back in the 1970s. And then we came to 1988, and Wolverhampton sold its share in the hall to Dudley, and after that Dudley applied for and successfully got grants from English Heritage and the European Regional Development Fund, which meant they'd got enough money to replace the roof and repair all of that render. And what about Himley Hall today? Well, It's still very popular. There are, I would say, hundreds of people here today. It's now used as offices for Dudley and Metropolitan Borough Council. And of course, as I said, you have got a kind of, I wouldn't call it a visitors centre, but a visitors bit. Just over there is where the entrance is. And there are lots of banqueting suites. So as a consequence, you get lots of events happening here, inside and out. Weddings, functions, conventions, for want of a better word. And of course, Dudley Armed Forces Day is held here at the end of each June on the Sunday. I think it's usually the last Sunday in June. So still very much alive and very much in use. So that's the story of Himley Hall and Himley in general. As I said, what I like about it is the fact it's still being used, it's fully functional today. Now, if you like the video and you've got this far, at least give it a thumbs up so it becomes more visible to more people on YouTube. As I said, thanks for watching, and don't forget, keep out the Oss Road.